Welcome back in this second part of our motion graphics tutorial about a point wave. My name is Helge Maus from pixeltrain. As promised in the first tutorial, I want to talk in this tutorial more about setting up the render scene and render it out and finish it in Adobe After Effects. And I hope I found some really good tips for you so that you can work more effectively and faster inside of Houdini. So if you haven't seen the first part of the tutorial, I would recommend to do that. So let's get started now with this scene. The first thing I normally do now is I normally work in projects. So never work with a single Houdini file because Houdini caches a lot and the caches are best saved inside of a project structure. If you have now generated a file like this and you now want to go to a project, it's really easy. The first thing you have to do is you go to the file menu and you make here a new project. And all my Houdini projects live here under $home. So in my home directory under Houdini projects. And I name now my project. For example, this is the tutorial point wave. And here you see all the predefined folders which Houdini will generate. If you want, you can have your own folders here. And here you can make sure that the path is exactly where you want to have it. After clicking accept, a project is generated, but you are not inside of this project in the moment. So you first have to save your file into the project, and then you have to make sure that you are inside the project. So if you want to make sure that you really have connected your project, you can go here to the edit menu, and here you find the aliases and variables menu. And if you go here to the variables, you find here a variable with the name job. And the job variable shows you which project is active at the moment. And you see after we have generated the project, Houdini has now connected the job variable to this new project here, and that's okay. If this link is not there, what you can do is you can go here to File, go here to Set Project, and then you can search here for your folder. I have a whole bunch of folders here, and you go into the folder which you like. For example, this here is our project folder tutorial point wave. Make a double click, and if you're now inside of this structure here, you can click accept, and then you can test through this menu again that the job variable sits now correctly. That's it. Now I can save this file here, so I go to Save As, and to make sure that I am really in the right project, you see I am now in the big Houdini projects, I can use here this shortcut for the job variable. So now I make sure that I'm inside of this structure. You can name now your file and click accept. Now everything is set up correctly, and now we are safe to work with our render setup. The first thing I now want to do is I want to cache out the whole thing here, because this is slow and I want to make sure that this here runs later faster. So I go here back into my point structure. Behind here our attribute VOP, we can now add a file cache node. I hook it in, set my display flag here. Now we can set up this first here from the frame numbers. You see we have here green fields, which means that in the background there's an expression going on. If you want to see the expression, make a left mouse button click here on start and end, and so you see that's a toggle. So you can see in the background the two variables which Houdini uses here, f_start and f_end. And so this is exactly here the full length of our project. What you can do now, if you only want to have a short part of that, you can make a right mouse button click over the field which you don't like and say delete channels, for example, and then you can insert here, for example, 500, because you are thinking about that 500 is enough. Or you can change the project length here under the global animation options, but 500 is enough for me. Then we change here the full thing to the frame range, so make sure that that's set. And now we talk really briefly about this path here. You see that we have now a whole bunch of variables where this cache is generated. $hip stands for the position of our hip file, so it's inside our project structure. We made that before, so that's okay. Then it searches for a geo folder, that's also all right. And then it saves it out with the hip name, so the name of my file, and $OS stands for operator string, so it names now the cache after this name here, file cache 1, BGU is the file format and SC means that it's compressed. And I don't like this path structure so much because it's not good for versioning and so on. What I normally do is I go in here after geo and remove the hip name. I don't need it anymore. And instead of that, I write again $OS slash and then $OS point. $F stands for the frame number. I like my frame numbers with 4 digits, so I add here a 4 after the $F. And that's now my new name here. So $OS makes a new folder. You see that this is a folder structure, and the folders are generated automatically if they don't exist because of this option here, create intermediate directories. Then it takes the name again, and then we have 4 digits and so on. In the moment, it looks not exactly what I want, so you can evaluate this string here by a middle mouse button click here on the name geometry file. You see then that the string is now evaluated. So if we scroll to the right, you see we get a new folder with file cache 1, and the numbers. And what I want is I want to have a name which makes more sense. And in my case, I normally name now the operator strings here. For example, this is my point wave underscore version 1. And now you see that the string here has now also changed to exactly this structure here, which makes more sense for me, because if I want to have another version of this point wave, I can make a duplicate here of this node here. For example, while holding down the Option key on my keyboard, I can drag here, make a copy, and you see Houdini will name this automatically to version 2. Then I cache only this one, and so I never lose one of these 2 caches, and that's the big advantage in working like that. So we go back now here, and I delete this cache node again, and press the middle mouse button again, because these dotted lines indicate that it's only an evaluation of the string. You can't change it here. You have to go back here into this structure to change here the names, but this is the format I normally use. So everything is done. We have set the frame range. We say we want to have the whole frame range here, and we have the new file path here, and then we can click here Save to Disk and wait for a moment. Okay, I hope everything has went well. We can now tick here Load from Disk, and if we scrub now here, you will see that we now get a file cache until frame 500, because that was the limit we set here, and that's exactly what we are after. And now we can work really interactively, and we don't have to think about waiting for some things going on here in the VOP. And if you want to make now changes, you can deactivate here the tick if you like, or you can click Save to Disk after you have made your changes, and so you overwrite your cache or make a new one. So let's go here now into the global animation options and change this to 500. Apply this, close this, and then we can set our display flag here. Now we have our 500 frames, and the next thing we now want to do is we want to set up a camera. You can do this by 2 different ways. You can hold down your control key and click here on this camera item here in the lights and cameras shelf. So you get a camera exactly at the position where your viewport sits, or you can do the same thing here by clicking on the cameras menu and say here new camera. After the camera is added here, we rename it with ShotCam. And to make now some adjustments to the camera, you can switch here while the camera is selected to the handle tool. The handle tool now gives you some indicators here. We have this frame here and also this widget in the middle, which you can use now to reposition your camera. You see, if I move this here, you translate your camera. If you grab this here, you go closer to the object or more far away. And what you also can do is you can tilt your camera by grabbing this here, or you can rotate it, grabbing this here, and you also can make a Dutch shot if you like, if you grab it here. Okay, so search for a nice shot, for example, something like that here. And if you want to move yourself, you have to be aware that you are not locked in the camera in the moment. That means this handle tool here is an interactive handle for these options on the node. But if you now move back, for example, I move now my viewport back, you will see that you drop out of the camera. The reason for this is you have to lock yourself into the camera to move inside of the camera. Let's demonstrate this. I go back into my camera here, shot cam, and it seems again that you are inside the camera, but instead of moving now, you click here this little lock sign, and you also get it here as an indicator. And if you now move yourself here, you will see that you move the camera instead of dropping out. So don't forget this little lock icon here. I remove it for now. Drop out and take a look now here. The next thing we want to do is we want to make a really fast test render. And you have to keep in mind that Houdini is in every context procedural. That means if you go here to the out context, you will see that we don't have a render node yet. You can get a render node by adding it through the tab menu, or you can go here to render, create a new render node, or you can use Houdini's interactive renderer for that. So if you go here to the render view and you don't have a renderer in the moment, but you have an auto create ROP, so in the moment you click here now render, you will see that Houdini generates you here a mantra IPR node, and you can use that if you like for later use. So let's take a look what you get. Okay, here are our points, and also it looks good here. What I want to do is I want to have a little bit a wider look here, and you see that the renderer still works, because if you go here now, you see we have an auto update running. That means every change which you do in the other context will automatically re-render this frame. That's okay for now, because I want to work interactively. So if we go now here to the camera, and a fast way to go to the camera is here in the render view. If you look here, you can see it uses the ROP camera, and if you click this little white icon here, you are connected to the camera which the IPR uses, and you will see that this camera doesn't exist. I renamed my camera with the name shot camera, and if you click here on mantra IPR, you see that it still tries to find cam 1, which doesn't exist in the moment in my scene setup. So what I do is I relink here by choosing it in this window, the camera with my shot cam, and then this indicator here always works. So if you click now here, it opens directly this window. I go to the view, and what we want to do is we want to render, for example, later in HD. So we can change that here. And then we go to the focal length, and we say we want to have, for example, a focal length of 24. And if we now look here, you see the view is much, much wider now. And so we have to readjust a little bit our camera. Okay, go back to the camera. And now I use this widget, and you see with the wider lens, it looks a little bit better in my taste. Okay, maybe a little bit closer, that's it. And you also can try now to find another frame where you can test this if you like that. Okay, maybe something like that here. Okay, the next thing we are after now is we want to have a little bit of a depth of field effect going on. And I think, sorry guys, I go a little bit up, and then I bring this here a little bit down so that we see the back a little bit better. I want to have a little bit of depth of field effect. To activate this, we need our render node here, and we go here into the tab rendering, and here we enable depth of field. So Mantra knows now that we need depth of field, and if we now restart the renderer to make sure that it really works, you may or may not see depth of field going on. Yeah, Mantra calculates the depth of field for sure, but depth of field is an optical effect, so it depends on physics. And to make now the depth of field look which you like, you have to keep in mind how the physics work. And depth of field depends on the back of the camera, the focal point which you have, and also the aperture which you use. And all these things you have to set right. You get exactly the look you're after. So to make this more easy, we drop out of the camera, and while the handle tool is active, you see that the camera here has a really complicated widget. And to make sure that we also see here the camera settings, I switch here to the camera. I go here to view. You have here the focal length. This is something we have done. Under sampling, you will see that here is an f-stop. The f-stop is 5.6 in the moment. Over that, we see the focus distance, which is 5 meters. So this is the focal point here. And we can now take this z-axis here and move it in front of the torus. And you will see while I'm doing that, I'm changing the focal distance. So now we are focusing, for example, let's do it from the top. For example, we go now here in the middle of this front part of the torus, so 2 meters. But do we now see depth of field? You can go to an online calculator, for example, depth of field master or so, and try now to insert your values to check if you see depth of field and how much you see. But there's a much more easier way inside of Houdini to do that. This is a little tip I can give you. This handle tool widget here can change, and if you want to know what other modes we have, you can make a right mouse button click here nearby, and you see that we have many options which are now depending on the camera because it's the camera widget. And in the moment you see the orientation handle here, which has the shortcut O. What we want to see now is the focus handle, which has the shortcut Z, and if you select that, you now see that you have different handles now. This handle here is the handle for the focal point. Okay, I have to go back here to my camera. And if I grab this here now, you see, yeah, this is the focal distance. Exactly. Then we have these two triangles. And if you read a little bit about depth of field, you know that depth of field happens in front of the focal point and also in the back. And there's a rule of thumb that 1/3 is in the front and 2/3 are in the back. But if you want to see that, you can use now these triangles. You will now see that the in focus goes now down until this point here, and we normally talk about an acceptant depth of field, and you can move this point here to make it more shallow, which you normally use inside of motion graphics, or broader. And what changes now is the f-stop. So it opens up the aperture for you to make this shallow depth of field. And this is a really visual way of working. And if you now take a look here into the render view, you now see that these background points are now blurred out. Really, really convenient. And we can demonstrate this a little bit more. Now you see this area here is in focus and the rest here is out of focus. Great. So this is a really nice way of working. If you now want to go back, press the O key or go back here to the orientation handle and everything is back to normal. Next step we have to do is we need a material for rendering the whole thing out. And for this I stop it for a moment. Now it depends on the renderer engine which you want to use. In this tutorial we use now Mantra. So we go here into the /mat context. And we add a shader, and in my case I use now a principled shader, a Disney shader. So add it here, you can name it prin_points, and then we drag it here onto the geometry container. And if you don't really find it here, you can also drag it directly on the torus. Then we can render the whole thing again. To make it now really bright, we have to keep in mind that the principled shader here normally uses the point colors, which are black and white, because that's the way we set it up in our first tutorial. And we don't need the point colors at all in the moment, so I deactivate them. Instead of that, we can now use one of the features of this shader, which is the emission color here. So the emission color is black in the moment. You can go here to the color chooser and make it, for example, white. And this is now self-illuminating. If you have other objects here which you don't want to illuminate, you can deactivate here this option. I think it's faster like this. And now you can think about, do you need albedo at all? And I deactivate this to get now this result. If you want, you can also make this with a color, and that's an interesting concept which I want to demonstrate you really fast here. So if you take, for example, a bluish color here, you get, like you expect, a blue torus. But what we want to do is we want to achieve later in, for example, After Effects or Fusion, a glow effect. What you are able to do is that you can now take the emission intensity here, which is 1, which means that you have the full range of 0 to 1 in the moment for the colors. You can overdrive this. So instead of using 1 as an output, or you remember when we have white, 1 is then the value for white, you can overdrive this, for example, with 3. And now the points are still blue, but they are now much, much brighter, 3 times whiter than white. And now you see that you get this really interesting range going on here. They start to glow a little bit without the typical glow effects, but I think you will see that later in After Effects that this makes sense because these points are now really, really bright. Okay, after setting now everything up, we can stop the renderer and make this file ready for rendering. So we go back to our mantra node. The settings are here under images, so we go now back, and here's again a path where everything lands. You see we have still our project structure, this time in the render subfolder, and I do absolutely the same thing like before. We name here now the node, point waves version 1, and I use now again this kind of string. I use $OS/$OS. And this time we have 4 digits here and EXR. And that's exactly what we want, because now we have the super wides here. We have values over 1, and we need a file format which can store these values. So EXR is good for that. If you now need other image planes or passes, which they are named in other renderers, you can go here to extra image planes. There are some standard passes here. You also can have some extra image planes here. If you press the plus sign and choose a vex variable, you have a whole bunch of predefined passes if you like. But this is a topic which you can later dive into. In our case, we don't need these things at all. So everything is fine here. Then we have to make sure that we have an image which has enough anti-aliasing going on. So let's switch the option preview off and click render. So it doesn't undersample anymore. It samples directly with the sample value which is set here in the rendering. And now see, you get the direct result. Now you can look here if it's crisp enough, and if not, you can increase the anti-aliasing, for example, to a higher value, for example 5 to 5. Now you see it's a little bit more crisp if you need that. And you also can lower a little bit the noise level. But I think that's absolutely enough here. And I'm really happy with the result. So everything is set here. Then we go back to images, make sure the path is correct. And then we can go to the valid frame range, change it to frame range. We set in the camera our render resolution to full HD. If you use a standard Houdini camera, it's not full HD, so you can override the camera resolution. If you tick this and open this, you can use a user-specific resolution, but I don't have to do that because I have done it before. So everything is nice. I stop the rendering here, and then you can render it to disk or render it to disk in background. And if the render is finished, we go to Adobe After Effects and make our final touches. See you in a minute. The rendering is finished and we are now in Adobe After Effects. I make a double click here in my empty projects to load now our point wave. It's a EXR sequence, so open EXR sequence is okay. We open this. One thing which is important, this is EXR, so it's linear. If you want, you can go here to interpret footage, to main, go to color management and preserve everything so that After Effects doesn't change anything here, or you can assign a profile here. It depends. After that, we can also make sure that the frame rate is correct. In my case, I want to have it with 25 frames a second. That's it. Okay. And then I take this image sequence and drag it here onto the create icon here, and we get something like that. And if we now cache this through, you see this is a result we get out of Houdini here. Great. And now comes the work which you normally do in Adobe After Effects. So we can add, for example, an adjustment layer here for making your effects. I go now to the effects. And what I want to do is I don't want to make now an After Effects tutorial, so I go here to the Red Giant VFX suite and I say, for example, okay, we want to have, for example, an optical glow here going on. And now you see that the super bright colors, which we set in Houdini, are really used here to make that. My footage is linear in our case, so makes more sense here. Then we have the amount, the size of the blurring. I think, yeah, it's a little bit too big. I make it smaller here. And then we can change the vibrance a little bit. Highlights only, so that we only get some of these really bright values here glowing. And again, this is due to the fact that we have set our dynamic range more than 1. So we can now really address the highlights much better. And then we can go in here and say, okay, I want to colorize the whole thing. We have made them blue. If you do it white, you have a better flexibility at this point. But yeah, you can tune them now a little bit here if you like. Okay, something like that. And then we can have an outer color. Let's try to be a little bit creative. Get greenish, something like that. Yeah, and that's it. So we are now with an effect like that. And if you're playing effects, maybe try another one. For example, from the trap code suit, a star glow or something funny. Bring this really down only to 2. And maybe we use here a prism, really small prism, something like that. We can boost the light, yeah, and then we can change opacity of that down so that we only get a little bit of that. So that's it. I think you can be creative with that and you get a result which you like. If you've found something nice, post it as a comment or on Instagram and drop me a mail. I hope this helped you. My name is Helge Maus from pixeltrain. If you need more information or have ideas for other tutorials, please let me know. Have fun with Houdini and motion graphics. Bye.